Good evening and welcome.
Wherever you are listening from, let your body rest.
Allow your shoulders to drop and let your breathing slow. There is nothing you need to solve tonight. We will follow an ancient road across wide plains and quiet deserts, guided by a promise that begins in silence. Listen softly and let the story carry you. In the old world, before borders were measured with rulers and ink, people understood land through movement. A family knew the country by wells that held sweet water, by trees that offered shade, and by tracks that disappeared into distance. Seasons were counted by lambing and harvest. Time was counted by fires that burned down to embers and by stars that returned night after night. In a city called Ur of the Chaldeans, built from baked brick and guarded by tradition, a man named Abram lived within certainty.
Ur was bright with torchlight after sunset.
Its markets were loud with barter and talk. Temples rose above streets, and incense drifted like a visible prayer. The gods of Ur were fashioned into shapes that could be carried, displayed, and named. Order lived in stone, and belonging felt permanent. Abram inherited the security of that place. He had family, work, and a future that seemed already written. Yet beneath the comfort, a quiet restlessness stirred. It was not anger at his life. It was not hunger for power. It was a sense that his days would not remain enclosed by the same walls. The call came without spectacle. It did not thunder from the sky. It did not emerge from a statue or a flame. It arrived as a certainty in the stillness, as if the air itself had become instruction. Leave your land.
Leave your people.
Leave your father's house. Go to the land I will show you. No map followed. No explanation softened the demand. There was only the invitation to trust what could not be seen. To obey meant letting go of everything familiar. It meant trading walls for tents and certainty for direction.
Abram gathered his household.
Sarai, his wife, walked beside him. Lot, his nephew, followed.
Servants prepared animals, bundles, and water skins. Then, with the steady pace of a caravan, they left Ur behind. They followed the great river northward because water is the oldest guide.
Villages passed. Fields narrowed, then widened again. Days grew hotter, then cooler. At night, Abram lay beneath an immense sky, and the stars seemed closer than the city's rooftops had ever allowed. Each star burned in silence, steady and indifferent, yet somehow comforting. They reached Haran and settled for a time. The road paused, routine returned. Abram's father grew old and died, and with that death the pause ended. Again, the call pressed forward, gentle but unyielding. So Abram rose, packed the tents, and moved once more. Crossing into Canaan, he entered a land of hills and valleys, where ancient trees marked places of shade and memory. People already lived there. They had their own gods and their own boundaries. Abram did not conquer and did not claim. He moved quietly, building small altars of stone as signs of devotion, not of ownership. Where he camped, he waited. Where he waited, he listened. But the land could be harsh. Rain failed, grass thinned, wells dropped, famine tightened its grip, and Abram turned south toward Egypt, seeking food and survival. Fear followed him across that border. In a foreign land, power belonged to strangers, and Sarai's beauty felt like danger. Abram asked her to say she was his sister, hoping to protect his own life. The choice brought safety, but it also brought trouble. Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's household. Then plague struck, and the truth rose to the surface like something that cannot remain buried. Abram was sent away. He left Egypt with increased wealth and a quieter heart, aware that fear can bend faith even when the road continues. He returned to Canaan, and the journey moved forward again.
In the first weeks on the road, Abraham learned how quickly a life can change when walls are left behind.
In the horizon was hidden by buildings and smoke. On the journey, the horizon widened until it felt like a great bowl of sky. Sometimes that openness felt like freedom.
Sometimes it felt like exposure.
When a storm approached, there was nowhere to hide. When strangers appeared on the road, there was no gate to close. Tents could be folded, but they could not become stone. He learned to read the land the way a sailor reads water. A line of greener plants meant moisture below the surface. A cluster of birds meant a hidden pool. A valley might hold shade in late afternoon, but it might also collect cold at night. Travel required attention, and attention calmed the mind. There is less room for endless worry when the next step must be placed carefully. Sarai carried her own silence. She had left familiar streets and familiar women. She had exchanged the certainty of a city for the uncertainty of a tent. Some nights she lay awake, listening to animals shift and breathe. Some mornings she rose before others and watched the sky change colour. On the road, her strength became quiet and constant. As the caravan moved, Abraham began to recognize how exile can be both loss and widening. He lost the comfort of familiar streets, but he gained the openness of the sky. He lost the certainty of temples, but he gained a faith that did not depend on carvings. He lost the protection of being known, but he gained the humility of being a guest in many places.
Some evenings, when the camp settled, he walked alone to the edge of the tents.
He listened to distant animals and to the faint crackle of fire. He thought of his father and of the house he had left. Then he looked upward again, because the stars were always there, returning like a promise that does not tire. In the early nights after leaving Abraham's sleep came lightly. He would wake to the creak of leather and the soft snort of animals. He would hear Sarai breathing beside him, steady and close. He would listen for danger because the road makes people alert. Then he would listen for something quieter, the faint sense that the call had not abandoned him. He learned that reassurance does not always arrive as words. Sometimes it arrives as endurance, as the ability to rise the next morning and take another step.
On one stretch of road, the caravan travelled alongside other wanderers.
Fires dotted the plain like small stars fallen to earth. Children's laughter carried briefly through the dark.
Abraham realized that many lives are exiles of one kind or another. Some leave because famine forces them.
Some leave because war drives them. Some leave because a king's taxes grow too heavy. His exile was chosen, yet he felt kinship with those who moved from necessity.
The road made strangers into neighbours, if only for a night.
At Haran, the pause was not wasted. Abraham learned how quickly a person can grow used to stopping. He rebuilt routine.
He repaired tools.
He listened to old stories repeated by elders. When his father died, grief anchored him to the earth. Then the call pulled again, and Abraham felt the strange mixture of sorrow and obedience. Leaving can hurt even when leaving is right. As the journey continued, Abraham learned the art of choosing camps. A camp must have water within reach, but not so close to a riverbank that sudden flood would take it. A camp must have open sightlines, but also a place where animals can rest in shade.
He learned to place the strongest tents at the windward edge.
He learned to keep firewood dry under skins. Small decisions like these are not glamorous, but they keep a household alive. He also learned that stories keep people steady. In stories were attached to buildings and ceremonies. On the road, stories had to be carried inside the voice. At night, Abraham sometimes spoke about his ancestors, not to trap the future in the past, but to remind the young that they belonged to something larger than a single season. When a child asked why they moved so often, he answered without bitterness. He said the road was part of their calling. He said they were learning to trust. Sometimes strangers shared their own stories in exchange. A trader spoke of storms at sea. A shepherd spoke of wolves in the hills. A widow spoke of leaving a village after war. Abraham listened. He found that listening kept his own heart open. A closed heart becomes hard in the desert. An open heart remains human. Once, on a long stretch between settlements, the caravan encountered a dry wadi, a riverbed that held only stones and dust. A few clouds gathered, promising rain, then dissolved into nothing. The animals grew restless. Abraham ordered the pace slowed, not to waste strength. He rationed water carefully. He watched Sarai's face for signs of exhaustion. He listened for complaints and answered them without sharpness. That evening, when the camp finally stopped, Abraham walked beyond the circle of firelight. He could hear the soft chewing of animals and the occasional cough of a servant. He could also hear his own thoughts, which are loudest when everything else becomes quiet. He thought of Ur's abundance. He thought of how easy it had been to find water in a city. Then he remembered the call, and he accepted the simplicity of it. He had not been promised comfort. He had been promised direction. He returned to the fire and sat without speaking. Sometimes leadership is simply staying calm so others can borrow your calm. On certain nights, the sky over the desert looked like black velvet scattered with salt. Abraham watched meteors streak briefly and vanish. He thought about how quickly a life can pass, like a spark. He wondered how a promise could outlast a single lifetime. Then he remembered that the promise had never been about his comfort. It had been about direction through time. That thought steadied him. He began to teach the younger ones in the camp to look up. He told them to notice constellations. He told them to learn the North Star's steadiness. Navigation, he explained, is not only for travel, it is for the heart. A heart without a fixed point becomes lost. Sometimes, as the camp slept, Abraham listened to the desert's smallest sounds. A beetle moving over sand, a distant owl, a branch creaking in wind. These sounds reminded him that the world continues without needing human permission. That continuation made him less anxious. If the world can keep moving, he thought, so can he. In the first year after leaving Ur, the caravan crossed stretches where the ground cracked like old pottery. Heat rose from the earth in wavering lines. The animals' tongues hung slightly from thirst. Abraham learned to travel in the early morning and late afternoon, resting during the harshest hours. He learned to find shade that did not exist by creating it, stretching cloth and using the angle of the sun. He learned that endurance is often a collection of small adjustments. He also learned that uncertainty can sharpen love. When each day is fragile, you notice small kindness, a servant who brings water without being asked, Sarai's hand resting briefly on his arm, Lot's voice calling a warning when a path grows steep. These moments became precious because the road could not guarantee tomorrow. At times, Abraham wondered what the people of Ur would say if they could see him now. They would see a man without walls, living under sky. They would see dust on his feet and sun on his face. They might think he had lost status, but Abraham felt he had gained something quieter. He had gained the ability to obey without needing applause. In Canaan, Abram's flocks multiplied, and so did Lot's. Goats and sheep spread across the hills like drifting clouds. Servants argued over grazing. Even the land seemed to groan under the weight of abundance, because abundance can create tension as easily as scarcity. Abram chose peace before conflict hardened. He spoke to Lot without bitterness. Let there be no quarreling between us, he said, for we are family. He offered Lot the first choice of land. Lot looked toward the plains near Sodom, water shimmered and grass grew thick, and he chose the easy ground.
Abram remained among the hills, where life required patience.
The separation was quiet. 2 paths diverged without shouting. Lot moved toward cities and their temptations. Abram stayed with tents and open sky. After Lot left, the voice returned to Abram in the hush of evening. "Lift your eyes," it said. "Look north and south, east and west.
All the land you see will be given to you and to your offspring.
Your descendants will be as countless as the dust of the earth." Abram believed, even though his tent remained childless. Belief, for him, was not a bright certainty. It was a steady decision, remade each day. Time passed, and the land became restless with war. Kings fought over territory like dogs over scraps. In one raid, Lot was taken captive, along with many others. News reached Abram like a wind carrying smoke. Abram gathered men born in his household, trained and loyal, and he pursued the invaders through night and distance. He attacked with strategy rather than pride. Against expectation, he prevailed. Lot was returned, shaken but alive. On the journey back, Abram met Melchizedek, king of Salem. This king carried himself like quiet authority. He brought out bread and wine, simple things that feel sacred when shared in peace. He blessed Abram in the name of the Most High God, and Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. No spectacle followed, only a sense that the road had touched something deeper than victory. That night, Abram felt fear settle over him, not fear of enemies, but fear of emptiness. He had rescued Lot, he had wealth, he had reputation, yet the promise remained distant. In the darkness, reassurance came. "Do not be afraid," the voice said. "I am your shield." Abram spoke the doubt he had carried.
"What can you give me?" he asked.
"Since I remain without a child, my servant will inherit my house." The answer did not come as argument.
It came as vision.
Abram was brought outside, into the open, where the sky was heavy with stars. "Look up," he was told. "Count them, if you can. So shall your offspring be." Abram believed, and that belief was counted as righteousness. Then came covenant. Animals were brought and divided, an ancient ritual marking seriousness and cost. Night fell. A deep darkness pressed close. In that darkness, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces, as if promise itself moved through the space. The covenant was sealed not by Abram's strength, but by faithfulness greater than him. Years continued to pass, and Sarah remained barren. Hope thinned, then returned, then thinned again. Waiting became a landscape Abram had to live inside. After the covenant, Abraham noticed how promises change the way a person sees ordinary things. A well was no longer only water. It was survival and future. A tent was no longer only shelter. It was a moving home that could cross years. Even the smallest child in the camp became a reminder that life multiplies in ways the mind cannot predict. He also learned that leadership on the road is mostly service. He settled disputes before they grew sharp. He measured supplies without greed. He chose routes that protected the weak. In seasons of abundance, he resisted arrogance. In seasons of scarcity, he resisted panic. He learned to speak calmly even when his heart felt crowded. At times, neighboring herdsmen tested him.
They blocked access to grazing.
They claimed wells. Abraham responded with patience, offering agreements, moving when necessary, and choosing peace when pride would have chosen a fight. His strength was real, but he kept it folded, like a blade carried for safety rather than display. After Lot chose the plains, Abraham spent many days learning the hills more deeply. He found hidden ravines where cool air lingered. He found small springs that appeared only after rain. He learned which slopes held grass longest in summer. He also learned that solitude has its own weight. Without Lot's love to nearby, the camp felt quieter. Abraham accepted that quiet rather than filling it with complaint. When war swept through the land, Abraham discovered that courage is not only the act of fighting, it is also the act of returning to peace afterward.
After the rescue, he refused offers that would entangle him in pride.
He wanted no trophy that would steal the simplicity of his trust. When Abraham returned from Egypt, he carried more than flocks and silver.
He carried a memory of how fear can twist speech. He thought often of Sarai in Pharaoh's house, of the vulnerability of being without protection. He did not speak of it constantly. He did not perform repentance. He simply became more careful with his choices. He became slower to hide behind half-truth. The road, he realized, punishes dishonesty by turning it into loneliness. In the hills, Abraham faced disputes over wells. A well is not only water, it is life, and life attracts conflict.
When neighboring herdsmen claimed a spring, Abraham sent messengers rather than soldiers.
He offered to share. He offered to dig another.
Sometimes the dispute ended with agreement.
Sometimes it ended with Abraham moving on. He learned that peace can require sacrifice of convenience. After the rescue of Lot, kings offered Abraham gifts and alliances. Power tries to entangle the faithful. Abraham refused what would bind him.
He accepted what was necessary.
He walked away from what would turn gratitude into pride.
In refusing, he protected the simplicity of his call.
During the years in Canaan, Abraham became familiar with the subtle differences between regions. Some valleys held dew longer in the morning. Some ridges carried cooler wind at dusk. Some plains looked fertile but hid salt beneath the surface. He learned that appearances can deceive and that patience reveals truth. He also learned the importance of blessing without grasping. When Lot chose the plains, Abraham did not curse him. He spoke peace and moved on. Later, when Lot needed rescue, Abraham did not say, "I told you so." He acted. He saw that a family bond is not measured by agreement. It is measured by willingness to help. After Melchizedek's blessing, Abraham's mind returned often to the idea that faith is wider than one tribe. The Most High God was not a small God limited to one city's temple. The blessing suggested a divine reality that stretches beyond borders. Abraham carried this thought quietly. It made him less tempted to despise foreigners. It made him more careful with arrogance. In the hills, Abraham formed friendships with a few neighboring clans. They shared news, warnings, and sometimes grazing space. A friendship on the road is not built on constant closeness. It is built on reliability. If wolves attacked, help was expected. If a well was poisoned, warnings were offered. In these small exchanges, Abraham's world grew wider than his own camp.
He also learned that the promise did not make him
superior. It made him responsible. The land he walked was still the land others walked. The water he drank was still water others needed. This awareness kept him from treating strangers as obstacles. He saw them as fellow travelers beneath the same sky. When Abraham pleaded for Sodom, his plea was shaped by this understanding.
He had learned to value ordinary people, not only saints.
Cities are filled with mixed lives. He asked that righteousness not be forgotten in the mass of wrongdoing. His plea was not naive.
It was compassionate. When Abraham met people who worshipped other gods, he did not always argue.
He listened because listening reveals what a person fears and what a person hopes. Some feared sickness, some feared drought, some feared enemies. Their gods reflected their anxieties. Abraham's faith began to feel different to him, not because it offered an idol to hold, but because it asked for trust without an image. That difference made him quiet.
He did not need to win debates. He needed to keep walking. In this way, Abraham's exile became a kind of freedom. He could not be trapped by one city's pride. He could not be confined by one tribe's habits. The road kept him open. In seasons when grass was plentiful, Abraham practiced gratitude. He did not treat abundance as entitlement. He shared with travelers. He allowed other herds to graze nearby. He understood that generosity keeps abundance from becoming pride. When Abraham prayed after the covenant, he noticed that his fear did not vanish, but it changed shape. It became less like panic and more like humility. He understood that the promise was not his to control. It was his to receive. This understanding made him more patient with delay. He became attentive to signs of life around him. A new shoot after rain, a bird building a nest near a well, a child in a neighboring camp learning to speak. These were small reminders that life continues through cycles, not through single dramatic moments. Abraham learned to see the promise not only in future generations, but in the resilience of the present. When he spoke to Sarah about the stars, he did not use them as an argument to silence her pain. He used them as comfort to stand beside her pain. Some nights they sat together outside the tent, saying nothing, letting the sky hold their questions. As waiting stretched, Sarah sought a way to make the promise tangible. She offered Hagar, her Egyptian servant, to Abram so that a child might be born. Hagar conceived, and with the pregnancy came pride, tension, and pain. Sarah felt diminished. Hagar felt seen in a new way. The household became brittle, like dry wood ready to crack. Sarah dealt harshly with Hagar, and Hagar fled into the wilderness, choosing thirst over conflict. In the open desert, where the horizon offers no hiding, Hagar encountered the same unseen presence that had called Abram. She was addressed by name. She was told to return, and she was given a promise for her child. Her son would be called Ishmael, because she had been heard. The wilderness did not erase her, it acknowledged her. Hagar returned, and Ishmael was born. Abram loved the boy, and time moved on. Years passed in a kind of quiet that can feel like absence. Abram grew older. The tents wore thin and were repaired. Wells were found and defended. Seasons repeated their lessons. Then, after long silence, the voice returned with new weight. "Walk before me and be blameless," it said. "Your name will no longer be Abram. You will be Abraham, father of many nations. Sarah will no longer be Sarai. She will be Sarah, and she will bear you a son." Abraham laughed, not because he mocked, but because the idea was too large for his age. Sarah laughed too, later, behind a tent flap, laughing at the thought of life blooming so late. A sign was given, circumcision, a mark carried in the body, a reminder that covenant is not merely spoken, it is lived, it is remembered. Soon after, Abraham sat by his tent in the heat of the day, when the world grows quiet and even animals seek shade. He looked up and saw 3 travelers standing nearby. He rose quickly, offering water for their feet, bread for their hunger, and rest under the tree. Hospitality was Abraham's language of faith. He did not ask first what they could offer. He offered because the road makes every traveler vulnerable. Sarah prepared food. A calf was chosen. The visitors ate, and then they spoke. They asked for Sarah. They declared that within a year she would have a son. Sarah laughed again, unheard in her own mind, and then she felt exposed, as if laughter itself had been witnessed. "Why did Sarah laugh?" the visitor asked. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" From that place, the travelers looked toward Sodom, and the atmosphere changed. Judgment was near. Abraham stood before the unseen presence with a heart that leaned toward mercy. He pleaded carefully, not with anger, but with concern. "If there are 50 righteous, will you spare the city?" Then 45, then 40. then 30,
then 20, then 10. He did not demand that evil be ignored. He asked that righteousness be remembered. Sodom and Gomorrah fell. Lot escaped with his daughters. The plain was scorched and the air tasted of ash. The road continued through a changed land. Abraham moved again, carrying both relief and sorrow, because mercy and judgment often travel together. And then, as promised, the season of waiting ended. Sarah conceived. Her body, long quiet, became a place where promise took shape. The months passed, and in time a child was born.
The years between Ishmael's birth and Isaac's promise were filled with small events that rarely enter legend but shape a life.
A lamb born too early, a sickness that moved through the animals, a sudden flood that forced the camp to climb to higher ground, a friend lost to fever, a child learning to walk, then to run, then to carry water without spilling. In those years, Abraham learned to love without possessing. He learned to bless without controlling outcomes. He learned that prayer often sounds like simple honesty. He also learned that uncertainty does not always mean abandonment. Sometimes uncertainty is simply the air where trust grows. When the three visitors arrived beneath the oaks, Abraham's hospitality did not come from strategy, it came from habit. The road had taught him that kindness keeps a world from becoming cruel.
A traveler who is fed today may be the one who offers water tomorrow.
Hospitality is a circle that prevents the desert from becoming empty. Hagar's story stayed with Abraham. He realized that God's attention was not limited to the central figures of a promise. In the wilderness, Hagar had been met and named. That truth widened Abraham's understanding. It taught him that the unseen presence watches those on the margins as closely as those at the center. This realization changed the way he spoke to servants. He began to ask more questions. He listened to reports fully before deciding. He learned that authority is most stable when it is humble. During the long silence between promises, Abraham's prayers became plain.
He did not always ask for answers.
Sometimes he simply spoke what was true. He spoke of loneliness. He spoke of weariness. He spoke of Sarah's quiet sorrow. He spoke of Ishmael's laughter and Sarah's tension.
He spoke of the desire for a future that did not depend on servants' children.
He learned that honesty is a form of worship. Sarah, too, carried her own inner landscape. She was strong, but strength does not erase longing.
Some mornings, she watched other women with their children and felt a dull ache.
Some nights she wrapped herself in blankets and stared into darkness, wondering whether the promise had been misunderstood. Her laughter later was complicated, mixing hope with disbelief. Even joy, when delayed, arrives with shadows of old doubt. When the visitors spoke under the oaks, Sarah's laughter softened into something like awe. She realized that her body, so long treated as finished, was being spoken of as possible. Possibility is a tender thing. It can feel like a gift and a danger at the same time. When Abraham's name changed, he felt the weight of responsibility grow. A name is more than sound. It is an identity carried into the future. Father of many nations did not feel like an achievement. It felt like a burden of expectation. Sarah's name change carried its own meaning. She was not only a wife waiting in the shadow of a promise, she was named as central, as honored. This gave her a steadier footing. She began to speak with more confidence in the camp's decisions. She began to imagine a future that included her, not just Abraham. The promise was no longer something happening around her. It was something happening within her. When the visitors arrived, Abraham's hospitality became a kind of prayer. Kneading dough, drawing water, offering shade. These were sacred acts because they welcomed life. In the desert, kindness is never trivial. It is survival shared. Sarah's laughter at the promise promise was remembered differently as time passed. At first, it was laughter that protected her from disappointment. Later, when Isaac lay in her arms, she understood her earlier laughter as a doorway. It had opened her heart just enough to accept the impossible. She did not become a different person overnight. She became a person who could hold joy after long waiting. Sarah's relationship with Isaac was gentle and fierce. She guarded him, she fed him, she watched him with the intensity of someone who knows how fragile fulfillment can feel. When she urged the sending away of Hagar and Ishmael, her fear was tangled with love. Abraham saw the tangle and suffered. He learned that families can be wounded even when guided. This knowledge made him more careful with judgment. After Isaac's birth, Sarah sometimes spoke to him as though he could already understand. She told him the story of the promise. She told him about laughter and waiting. She did not hide the years of sorrow. She did not romanticize them. She simply placed them behind her like a long road walked. Her honesty gave Isaac a foundation. A child raised on truth does not need to invent stories to feel secure. When Isaac grew strong, Sarah's joy became less anxious. She learned to let him wander with insight. She learned that love does not always mean holding tightly. Love can also mean trusting the world. When Sarah held Isaac, she sometimes closed her eyes and breathed as if she were learning joy again. Joy after long waiting can feel unfamiliar. She let it become familiar slowly. She let it settle into her bones. The household's tensions around Hagar and Ishmael taught Abraham about divided love. He loved Sarah and he loved Hagar's child. He wanted peace, and yet peace was fragile. When conflicts rose, he tried to calm them with fairness. But fairness does not always heal jealousy. He learned that some wounds must be carried for a time. After Isaac's birth, Abraham tried to honor Ishmael without threatening Sarah's security. He gave the older boy responsibilities. He spoke blessings over him. He taught him skills.
Yet he could not prevent the fracture that eventually came.
When Hagar and Ishmael left, Abraham stood with sorrow and accepted that some paths separate. The fact that Hagar found a well in the wilderness became a lasting image for Abraham. Provision, he realized, can appear in the most barren places. A well can be hidden until eyes are opened. That truth offered him quiet hope when his own future felt uncertain. The child was named Isaac, which means laughter. Not the laughter of disbelief now, but the laughter of fulfillment. Sarah spoke of joy. Those who heard her could not miss the astonishment in it. A tent that had held only waiting now held a child's breath. Isaac grew, and with his growth, the household shifted. There were celebrations and ordinary days. There were small illnesses and quick recoveries. There were afternoons when Abraham watched Isaac play, and the weight of years lifted for a moment. Yet complexity remained. Ishmael was older, and tensions did not vanish. In time, Sarah insisted that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away, fearing for Isaac's inheritance. Abraham was distressed. He loved both sons, but guidance came and he listened, even when listening hurt. Hagar and Ishmael departed into the wilderness with water and bread. In the desert, water ran out. Hagar placed Ishmael beneath a bush and walked away so she would not watch him die. She wept. Then a voice called to her again.
"Do not fear," it said. "God has heard the boy."
Her eyes were opened to a well nearby. They drank. They lived. Ishmael grew in the wilderness, becoming a skilled archer, shaped by hard land and survival. The story held more than one lineage. Promise did not erase pain. It moved through it. Isaac continued to grow.
Abraham aged into gentleness.
Then came the moment that would define his trust more sharply than any other. The voice came again. Take son, whom you love. Go to the region of Moriah, offer him there." Abraham rose early. He did not linger in debate. He saddled the donkey, split wood for the offering, and took Isaac and 2 servants. The journey to the mountain was slow. Each step carried weight. The sky above remained indifferent, bright by day and starry by night. After 3 days, Abraham saw the place from a distance. He told the servants to stay behind. He placed the wood on Isaac's shoulders and took the fire and the knife himself. Father and son walked upward together. Isaac spoke with the simple clarity of a child who trusts. "My father," he said, "here is the fire and the wood.
Where is the lamb for the offering?"
Abraham answered with words shaped from both truth and surrender. "God will provide, my son." They reached the place. Abraham built the altar with careful hands.
He arranged the wood.
He bound Isaac and placed him on the altar. The moment was quiet, not dramatic. It was a silence where every breath can be heard. Abraham raised the knife. Then the call came, urgent and clear. "Abraham, Abraham." "Do not lay a hand on the boy," it said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He offered the ram instead. Provision replaced sacrifice. The mountain held the sound of relief. Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." And the promise was reaffirmed, not as reward, but as confirmation that trust had found its shape. They descended together. The road did not become easy, but it became clearer. Faith was not a feeling that stays bright. It was an act, repeated and sometimes completed only at the last moment. Years later, Sarah died. Abraham mourned deeply. He did not hide grief behind strength. He wept, and then he acted. He purchased a field and a cave as a burial place. It was the first piece of land he truly owned in the country he had been promised. The promise entered the ground through a grave. After Isaac's birth, Abraham sometimes sat at a distance and watched him sleep. He watched the rise and fall of the child's breathing, amazed by the quiet strength of it.
He remembered the years when he and Sarah had spoken of children as if they were stories for others. Now the child's small hand could close around his finger, and the future felt real in his palm. When Isaac grew old enough to walk beside the flocks, Abraham showed him how to move gently among animals. He taught him to avoid sudden gestures. He taught him to respect fear in a creature's eyes. He taught him that strength is most useful when it is calm. These lessons were practical, but they were also spiritual. A person who learns gentleness with animals often learns gentleness with people. The journey to the mountain of testing was not only a test of obedience, it was also a journey through every memory Abraham carried. Each step held the echo of Ur. Each step held the echo of Haran. Each step held the echo of the stars he had been asked to count. On that road, he walked through his entire life, and yet he placed his next foot forward anyway. When the ram appeared in the thicket, Abraham's relief did not erase the memory of fear. It transformed it. Fear became a reminder of the edge where trust must stand. He understood that faith is not a shield against trembling. It is the decision to walk while trembling. After the descent, Abraham and Isaac spoke little. Words felt unnecessary. Their quiet companionship became its own kind of healing. Sometimes the deepest comfort is simply the presence of someone beside you on the path. Isaac's childhood brought ordinary tenderness.
He learned to speak the names of animals.
He learned to carry small bundles.
He learned to listen for his father's voice in the dark. Abraham told him stories, not to impress him, but to give him roots in movement. He spoke of Ur, not as a lost paradise, but as a starting place. He spoke of Haran as a pause. He spoke of Canaan as a land to walk through carefully. He taught Isaac that promise is not always possession. Sometimes promise is simply direction.
The day Abraham sent Hagar away, he stood alone for a long time after she left.
He watched the horizon swallow her figure. He did not celebrate. He did not rage. He felt the cost of divided households. He understood that even obedience can wound. That understanding made him gentler with others' pain. After the mountain, Abraham's love for Isaac did not diminish. It deepened. It became less anxious. He began to see Isaac not as his proof, but as his trust. The difference changed his hands.
When he placed them on Isaac's shoulders, it was with gratitude rather than fear.
As Isaac grew, Abraham noticed how a child asks questions with fearless honesty. Isaac's curiosity was not disrespect. It was openness. Abraham tried to answer in ways that preserved wonder rather than crushing it. When Isaac asked about the meaning of altars, Abraham explained that an altar is a reminder. It remembers gratitude. It remembers dependence. It remembers that life is not owned. In speaking these things aloud, Abraham felt them settle more deeply in himself. After the mountain, Abraham changed in small ways. He became slower to speak about the future as something he could control. He became quicker to bless the present. He laughed more easily at small joys. He recognized that provision often hides until the last moment, and that panic does not summon it. This recognition softened his face. It softened his hands. The mountain journey also changed Isaac. He did not speak of it often, but silence can contain memory.
Afterward, Isaac's eyes held a depth that had not been there before. He had learned that his father's faith was real, and that his father's love was also real.
He had learned that provision can come at the edge. He carried that lesson into adulthood. In later years, when Isaac stood beside the flocks and watched the sun set, he sometimes looked toward distant hills. He did not always know what he was searching for. Perhaps he was searching for the place where fear had turned into relief. Perhaps he was simply learning, like Abraham, that a person can hold mystery without needing to solve it. When Abraham returned from the mountain, he rebuilt routines deliberately. Routine, he realized, can heal. He checked flocks, he repaired ropes, he shared meals. Each ordinary act anchored the household back into life. Trauma often tries to freeze time. Routine allows time to move again. He also began to pray with fewer words. His prayers became like breath.
Simple,
steady, present. He learned that the deepest faith is sometimes quiet enough to be mistaken for silence. After the mountain, Abraham noticed how sunlight looked different on ordinary mornings. It was the same sun, but his attention had changed. He felt more present. He felt less hurried. He felt grateful for simple things like water and shade. In later years, Abraham sometimes returned in his mind to the moment he pleaded for Sodom. He remembered the careful lowering of numbers, the tension between justice and mercy. He did not see himself as powerful in that moment. He saw himself as compassionate. The world, he understood, is rarely pure. Cities hold both cruelty and kindness. He had learned to value ordinary goodness, and he did not want it erased. This compassion shaped how he led his camp afterward. When a servant made a mistake, Abraham corrected without humiliation. When a traveler arrived weak, Abraham fed them before asking questions. He knew that people flourish under mercy more than under fear. He also knew that mercy does not mean ignoring boundaries. It means applying boundaries with care. As Abraham aged, the lessons of the road became internal. He could sit still and feel movement inside him, like a river beneath the ground. The call had become part of his breathing. After Sarah's burial, Abraham moved with slower steps. Grief changes the pace of days. Even the wind feels different when someone is missing. He sat longer in the evenings,
He spoke less at night.
but the steadiness of his trust remained. He sought a wife for Isaac, not from the surrounding peoples, but from his own kin.
He sent a trusted servant with instructions and a prayer. The servant travelled back toward the lands Abraham had left long ago, following roads shaped by memory.
At a well, he asked for a sign of kindness. The sign was not grandeur, it was generosity.
Rebecca arrived carrying a jar.
She drew water for the servant, and then she drew water for his camels, a task that required patience and strength.
Her kindness revealed her heart. She agreed to leave her home and travel into the unknown, stepping into Abraham's story as Abraham once had stepped into his.
Isaac and Rebekah married, and the household found new rhythm.
Abraham watched the next generation take shape. He saw continuity, not completion. Promise, he understood, often arrives as beginnings rather than endings. In old age, Abraham reflected on the road that had shaped him. He remembered without longing. He remembered Egypt without shame. He remembered the hills of Canaan with familiarity rather than ownership. He had lived as a stranger, and yet he had also lived as one guided. He had made mistakes, and he had returned to listening. He had waited through long silence, and he had recognized that silence can hold preparation. He blessed his children. He spoke of direction rather than certainty. He urged mercy because mercy had preserved him. He urged hospitality because hospitality had opened doors. He urged restraint because restraint keeps peace when power tempts the hand. When death came, it did not rush him.
He died full of years, gathered into the rest of his ancestors.
His body was laid in the cave he had purchased beside Sarah. The land he owned was small, but the story that grew from it was vast. Abraham's life was not the story of a conqueror. It was the story of a traveler who learned to trust a voice without image. It was the story of leaving, waiting, receiving, and letting go. It was the story of faith shaped by road and sky. Now, as the night grows quieter around you, allow the images to soften. Imagine a line of tents beneath an open sky. Imagine the slow pace of animals moving across hills. Imagine the coolness of a well at midday. Imagine stars above a sleeping camp, steady and bright. Let your breathing remain slow. Let the ancient road fade gently into darkness. The journey has been told, and you may rest. In the years after the mountain, Abraham's faith became quieter, like a fire that has burned long enough to become steady coals. He no longer needed dramatic moments to remember the call. The call lived in ordinary decisions. It lived in the way he treated strangers. It lived in the way he negotiated peace. It lived in the way he accepted sorrow without collapsing. When he purchased Sarah's burial cave, Abraham insisted on fairness. He refused to take the land as a gift because he wanted the covenant to have a tangible root. He weighed the silver openly in front of witnesses, and he accepted the full price. Grief did not make him careless. It made him precise. He understood that memory needs a place and that a place requires truth. When Rebekah arrived, Abraham watched Isaac's face change. The household's future stepped forward quietly. Abraham did not cling to leadership. He allowed it to pass, the way a river passes between banks. To release control is another form of trust. In the final season of his life, Abraham often sat near the entrance of his tent at dusk. He watched light fade across the hills. He watched servants return with animals. He watched Isaac's household find its own shape. He did not rush the future. He allowed it to come. He remembered the first call as clearly as he remembered Sarah's laughter. Both had changed him. One had moved him outward. The other had filled him inward. Together they made a life that was not simple, but was steady. When Sarah died, Abraham's grief was practical as well as emotional. He needed a place to lay her body. He went to the gate where negotiations were held, and he spoke with the people of the land. They offered him a gift, but gifts can be taken back. Abraham insisted on purchase. He weighed silver carefully, and he named the field and the cave. Witnesses listened. The agreement became permanent. In that transaction, Abraham carved a small piece of stability out of exile. The promise touched earth through a grave. Later, when he sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac, Abraham's instructions were careful. He wanted a woman of kindness. He wanted a household shaped by generosity. The servant traveled back toward Abraham's kin, carrying gifts and listening for guidance. At a well, he watched and waited. When Rebekah offered water freely, not only to him but to his camels, he recognized the sign. Generosity, he understood, reveals character. As Abraham approached death, he did not cling to life with panic. He had lived too long with uncertainty to fear its final form. He blessed what he could bless. He released what he could not control. He trusted the next generation to continue walking. After Abraham bought the cave, he visited it sometimes in silence. He did not linger in despair. He simply acknowledged the place. A grave, he learned, is both an ending and a stake driven into the earth. It says this life mattered. It says this story has roots here. When Rebekah joined the household, Abraham watched Sarah's absence echoed in new forms. Rebekah learned the rhythms of tent life. She learned where water was stored. She learned how bread was baked in desert heat. She also learned the family story. Abraham told it gently, not as a demand, but as inheritance. Near the end, Abraham's breathing slowed and his eyesight weakened, yet his mind remained clear. He remembered the first call as a turning of the world inside him. He remembered each hard decision, each mistaken fear, each moment of mercy. He did not claim perfection. He recognized growth. He understood that faith is shaped through time, like stone shaped by water. Abraham's last years were marked by quiet generosity. He gave gifts while he still had strength to give them. He settled disputes among children before they became wars. He spoke blessings over those who served him. He thanked them for journeys shared. A household that has walked through hardship becomes a kind of family, even when titles remain. When he lay down in final weakness, the sounds of the camp were familiar. A cooking fire crackled, a goat bleated, someone laughed softly in another tent. Life continued around him, and that continuity comforted him. He had lived long enough to see that endings do not erase what was built. They simply hand it forward. He closed his eyes and breathed one last time, and the story passed into memory. Near the end, Abraham sometimes asked Isaac to walk with him at dusk. They would go a short distance from the tents and stand where the air cooled. Abraham would point toward the horizon and speak of the first call. He would not lecture, he would simply remember aloud. Isaac listened. In listening, he inherited more than property. He inherited direction. When they returned to camp, the fires would be lit. The smell of bread would rise. Night would settle. And the story would continue, one calm evening at a time. In the final blessing, Abraham spoke of peace. He spoke of hospitality. He spoke of patience. He did not promise that the road would be easy. He promised that the road could be walked. When Isaac married Rebekah, Abraham watched the joining of two stories. Rebekah carried her own memories and her own courage. She had left her family and traveled into unknown land, much as Abraham once had. Abraham respected that courage.
He treated her as a partner in the household's future, not as a possession.
He spoke to her sometimes in the quiet of morning. He told her about wells and storms and the patience required by tents.
He told her that the promise does not remove hardship, it gives meaning to hardship. He told her that fear will come and that fear does not need to be obeyed. In his final days, Abraham's world became smaller, but it did not become empty. The sounds of the camp were still present, the scent of bread still rose, the voices of children still carried. He felt the comfort of continuity, and he trusted that continuity would remain after him. When the end came, it came like nightfall, unhurried and natural, a final breath, a settling, a quiet release. The road he had walked did not vanish. It remained in the lives of those who continued walking. And now, as the final image settles, remember that Abraham's story is a road more than a monument. It is the quiet practice of moving forward one day at a time. Let that quiet practice become your comfort. Let your thoughts become lighter. Let sleep come gently.